All right, guys, today we're going to talk about standard 4.3, and you can see I got a little haircut, a little short today, but hey, it is what it is. Hey, standard 4, anyway, is about capitalism and how it impacted the United States in the late 1800s. There are going to be a number of changes. If you think about the United States up until this point, it's been largely agricultural. A lot of farmers growing things. Yeah, the North has banking, the North has industry, but especially the South, the West, even up in the north to some degree, there's a lot of agriculture. If you looked around lately, like Greenville and the surrounding area, there's not as much agriculture going on here. So how does that change? Well, the answer is largely capitalism in the 1800s is going to make everything explode. We're going to talk about that today. So capitalism is an economic system that's characterized by two things. Number one, you own stuff, like I've got with me my handy dandy iPhone 4. Yes, I know currently the 6 something is out, but I still have a 4. Whatever. It's mine. It's my personal private property. Right? That's part of capitalism. I can own stuff. But also the second thing is that I can use my stuff to make a profit for myself. So if I want to sell this, I mean, I'll probably get like 10 bucks for it, but whatever, I'll get the 10 bucks. I can do that. Or I can keep it. I can use it to transact business or whatever I want to do. Okay? That's capitalism. It's different from some other forms of economic systems, such as socialism, where the government actually controls many of the factors of production. The government might even own some of the land and that kind of stuff, which currently isn't typically how we do things. Okay? Now, in the early 1800s, there isn't a lot of government involvement in the economy. The government lets people who own stuff do whatever they want to. Very little regulation. Corporations got money by raising stock. So if I wanted to start a business, I'd go out there and say, all right, I'm going to start a business. It's a book selling business. So if you want to get in on board with my business, give me, I don't know, $100 each. That'll be one share of stock. If I make a profit, we'll split the profit equally depending on how many shares of stock you buy. That was pretty simple. And to be honest, that's still pretty much how a lot of corporations tend to raise money, through the use of stock. One of the biggest industries that grows in the early 1800s is the railroad. And we talked last time about the Transcontinental Railroad, but I don't want you to think there's just one. There are actually several transcontinental routes that get completed after the Civil War. This is huge because as the railroad grows, you've got to have steel beams, so the steel industry is exploding. You've got to have lumber to put down the actual wood, they call them railroad ties. You've got to get lumber for that. And the coal industry, because you've got to fuel the actual train. So all these industries are exploding. Not to mention the fact that the railroad can carry each of these things, the steel, the lumber, and the coal, from point A to point B. We're finding more like coal deposits or iron deposits in the West and bringing it to the East. For sale or for manufacturing, and everything is going really, really well. The railroad's awesome because it brings new settlers to the West, because remember, there's free land, or there's cheap land at least, depending on what time you're trying to buy it. There are new towns that are going to grow up along the train routes, and if you look at a map of the American West, there are actually a number of spots where you see basically a straight line of lights. In fact, give me just a second, and I'm going to try to find that for you. I'm going to pause this really quick. Hold tight. All right, here it is. I got it. This is a map of the United States at night. Now, if you look to the east, it looks like kind of just a jumble of stuff. But if you go out to the west, oh, shoot, I can't blow it up easily. There you go. If you go out to the west, you notice you've got a lot of straight lines here and evenly spaced lights. What are those lights? Well, those lights, very simply put, are the cities that grew up along those routes. You can see that, like here, for example, there would have been a railway line. Here would be a railway line. And that's why those new cities end up there, because it's right along the railroad. There are old towns that they would try to hit with the railroad because they knew that they were already mining coal there, for example. And so they'd say, we need more coal, let's build a route through this particular city. The railroad is going to allow the meat market and the fish industry to sell to new places. It used to be that if you grew or if you did fish, you could only catch fish and then sell it to people locally. Well, now with the railroad, we can put it on the train and get it, maybe 100 miles, 200 miles away before it goes bad. And so you have a much bigger market for selling your stuff. The railroad is a huge advancement to people in the mid 1800s, especially. But the problem is that everybody wants to get in on this action, and everybody is starting a railroad. And so there's fierce competition, which drives down prices. So, in other words, if you have 10 transcontinental railroads, each one is going to try to undersell the other one. So if this guy is going to charge $100 to go from New York to, I don't know, Los Angeles, would probably be cheap. But anyway, so $100. Somebody else says, no, I want you to use my railway line instead. So they might only charge $95. And somebody else is going to say, well, I'm going to do it for only $90. If you keep doing this, not everybody's going to be making a profit. And some railroads will fail. Others are going to merge together to survive. So, for example, I grew up in a town where there was a lot of, there was a railroad that ran right through it. And one of the big railway companies that would send trains through was the B&O Railroad. That stands for Baltimore and Ohio, not bodybuilder, okay? But that came about because there used to be a Baltimore Railroad and an Ohio Railroad, and at some point they had to merge. I'm not sure if it was here at this point that we're talking about or not, but they had to become one company in order to survive. Well, because a lot of the railway companies couldn't survive, now people are losing work left and right, and there's a nationwide depression. We talked about that a little bit in class. So the railway is a huge thing that's going to fuel the economy in the 19th century. But there are also some individual people you should know about that fueled the economy. One of those guys is this man. His name is Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie gets really intelligent because he actually brings something called the Bessemer process from England to the United States. Now, the Bessemer process is where you take basically you take iron and you dump it into a big hopper like this, and then you superheat it, which is what you see here. This is a cutaway. You blast more and more air into it so the impurities actually burn off, okay? So what you're going to get at the end is pure iron without any impurities in it. That I just said the same thing twice. Forgive me. That is what we call steel, because if you use what we typically think of as iron, it has a lot of impurities, and so it's going to bend more easily. But steel just doesn't bend very easily at all. That's why if you think about Superman, one of the things that, as a kid, I always think of Superman doing was taking steel beams and bending them. Well, he can do that because he's super, super strong, but otherwise it's going to be almost impossible to do. Because Carnegie is the guy to bring the Bessemer process to the United States, he controls the steel industry in the U.S. in the late 1800s. And just as an aside, he puts his business in the city of Pittsburgh, which has a football team that has something to do with steel. I can't remember. But of course, it's the Steelers. They're not the Steelers because they're criminals. They're Steelers because there's a lot of steel there in Pittsburgh, okay? If you've ever wondered why they call themselves the Steelers. Now, Carnegie is a smart guy, and he does something that we call vertical integration. So what's that? Well, he decides that he's going to have a monopoly on every piece of the steel industry. Usually you think of a monopoly as we buy every single shoe company out there. But Carnegie says, no, we're going to do this differently. I'm going to buy up the mine. I'm going to buy the railroad that would take the steel from the mine to the plant, where we're going to turn the iron into steel. I'm going to then control the plant itself. I'm going to own that. I'm going to control the railway that then takes the finished product and sends it to the construction company. And I'm going to buy the construction company too. So Andrew Carnegie is really intelligent because every piece of profit in that entire chain goes to him. Okay? So this is vertical integration. The guy's a genius. He's not the only guy in the 1800s, though, that figures out that industry is a way to make a quick buck. This guy is John D. Rockefeller, and he owned Standard Oil. And I know my picture is covering it up, but there's a logo there that says Standard Oil. Okay? John D. Rockefeller realizes that for industry to grow, we're going to have to lubricate the equipment. And every piece of machinery has to have some kind of lubrication, pretty much. He's also going to realize that we need fuel. And oil is, of course, how you get fuel. So he founds the company of Standard Oil, and at his peak, he controls about 90% of the oil in the United States, which is just absolutely massive. He is a smart guy, and so he does a couple things. He forces the railroad to give him rebates. Basically, he says, I won't even use your railroad unless you give me a really good deal. So he negotiates some very fierce deals. He buys up retail outlets and won't let them sell other products. That means it's kind of like if Pepsi bought Walmart and said the only soft drinks you can sell are Pepsi products. It's basically what he does. He'll buy up a company and say, you can't sell my products or my competitors' oil products. If there were some real competitors, he would go into an area, start selling something at a really ridiculously low price until the other company goes out of business, and then he'd jack his prices up. So, for example, let's go back to the Pepsi and Coke thing. So Pepsi would be trying to undercut Coke, so they'd say, we'll sell our 12-liter, or not 12-liter, 12-ounce bottle for, I don't know, 25 cents. Coke is still selling theirs at $1.25. So even if you're a Coke person, you're probably going to buy a little bit of Pepsi because it's way, 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 way cheaper. The problem is when Coke goes out of business, then all of a sudden Pepsi is going to jack up the price to $3 a bottle. Either you don't buy it or you have to spend the money that they're asking. That's what John D. Rockefeller does. Rockefeller also begins a type of organization called the trust. This is what more of your standard monopoly. So the trust would be one company that would own all of the oil companies in a certain area or in the United States. That is something that we have an issue with today. We call this horizontal integration. It's when one company controls all types of a business, or like a trust controls all types of a business. So I use the example in class of Toyota of Greer, Nissan of Greer, and Kia of Greer. A couple of years ago, I had to buy a car, so I went to those places, and I realized that the prices were very, very, very similar, okay, for similar types of cars. Well, a couple months later, I found out that's because they're all owned by one person. Okay, now that's not illegal. That's just smart. There are other car companies in Greer you can buy from. Okay, but the point is this: it's a type of horizontal integration. The guy who owns that, or the group that owns that, is trying to get as much of the car business in Greer as they can, and so they own all the companies, many of the companies. We talked about these political cartoons in class. Clearly the one on the left is showing Rockefeller as like a king. His kingdom is Standard Oil. The crown jewels in his crown are the railroads and the oil reserves. Over here you have, again, Standard Oil. It's a little bit hard to see, but it's got its tentacles around governmental officials, around the White House, around the Capitol building, around some kind of state house. The idea is that clearly Standard Oil is controlling everything. Now, I'm actually going to have to stop here. We don't have a whole lot of time left in this one. It's only one more section. But I want to make sure that we get the whole thing in, and I'm going to run out of time if I don't stop right here. So go ahead and pick up with standard 4.3, I think it is. Let me check. Yeah, 4.3b on the other side. Probably click right next to the link where you found this one, and that will get you there. Thanks for watching. Email me if you have any questions. Bye.